Hi, everyone. Welcome to Module 2. This module is about public speaking foundation. So we'll talk a little bit about the history of rhetoric, and then we'll also talk about the communication model. So they're foundational in the sense that we're talking about history and what's gotten us to where we are today, but then also we're talking about the fundamentals of the communication process. And that can be when you're giving a speech, when you're on the phone with a friend, when you're on Zoom, when you're recording a speech, and how we can maximize our success through the communication model. First, we'll start off with rhetoric. Rhetoric is the practice of oratory or public speaking. More broadly, it's a term with multiple meanings, all of which relate to aspects of human communication. So if you think about somebody asking a rhetorical question, they're asking you to think, assuming that you pretty much know what the answer is or should be, right? And rhetoric essentially is that in a nutshell. We're asking you to think critically about what it is that you're listening to or what it is that you're saying yourself. Aristotle defines it as the faculty of observing in any given case the available means of persuasion. So, faculty, as in a sense, like hearing or seeing, and observing available means of persuasion. So, who is being persuaded and what are they being persuaded to do or say or think? Early rhetoric centers around Greece, of course. So, we're thinking about 5th century before the Common Era. Athens is the site of the world's first direct democracy. So, if you think back to anything you've ever learned about Greek philosophy or early civilization, this is the root of rhetoric as well. The Greeks needed skills to help them settle their civil disputes, to determine what their laws would be, those policies, and a lot of those are foundational to our own constitution and that of other early European countries as well, and still hold true today. There are different types of oratory. So there's forensic oratory, which is legal speech, deliberative oratory, legislative or political speech, and epideictic oratory, which is delivered at a ceremony. So if you think of a eulogy at a funeral or an acceptance speech for winning an award. And these are all things that go on every day, and people don't necessarily think about their Greek roots, right? But we can trace them back and connect all of the dots there. There are lots of important people in the history of rhetoric, of course, lots of Greeks. And one of them that we're going to talk about today is Corax. Corax focused on judicial speech in courts and identified what some of the parts of those speeches might be. And Corax had a student named Tisius who focused on how speech gives value to things and the probability of persuasion. So if you're giving a speech, informing people about something, then it's now at the forefront of their minds. It's now something that they consider when they go about their daily lives. And then how probable are they to be persuaded to believe what you believe or to do what you do? And since those are so foundational to the study of rhetoric, it makes sense that that happened early on. We also had the sophists. They were specialists who would teach on speech and cover things like virtues. And we're particularly concerned about the sophists here because they had an era of elitism, and it was more so about the virtues and morals of the upper class and those who were in power, so wealthy men. And if they were determining virtues, then what did that mean for the rest of society? So we're challenging that here with some other individual non-sophist scholars like Socrates, who you can read a little bit about in your book on page 4 under the classical roots of public speaking, and Plato and Aristotle, who were not sophists. But for example, Plato was a philosopher, and we remember him for his dialogues on ethics. And then Aristotle was a major contributor to rhetoric as we know it. So make sure to read up a little bit about them and consider their contributions as we move forward through the rest of this module and then also through the rest of this course. The five canons of rhetoric are what we're going to focus on from our Greek philosopher historians here, and particularly that of Aristotle and then later Cicero. The first canon of the five is invention, discovering the types of evidence and arguments you plan to make your case, adapting speech information to the audience in order to make your case, right? So invention isn't just coming up with your speech topic, it's coming up with essentially the outline of what your argument's going to be, what your purpose is going to be for the speech. And then we will use the second canon, arrangement, to organize those thoughts. So arrangement involves organizing the speech in ways that are best suited to both the topic and the audience. And just think of that as we talked about in the first unit, of making sense and communicating your goal. Like you all wrote SMART goals for module 1. You're arranging the things that you want so that they can be communicated well. The third of the five canons of rhetoric is style. That's the way the speaker uses language to express the speech ideas. So if I tell you that I drive a car, it's very hard for you to picture what that looks like, right? You're not picturing a semi truck, or probably not even a pickup truck, right? You're probably picturing a four-door sedan or a Honda Civic or something. But I can use style and language to paint a clearer picture for you. So I could say I drive a long blue car that is shallow to the ground, and I have green lights under it and purple wheels, and it goes very fast. It's a far more vivid picture. And if you're trying to persuade, style is particularly important because you can use it to appeal to people's senses and then persuade them further. The fourth of the five canons of rhetoric is memory, the practice of a speech until it can be artfully delivered. You'll use memory in this course. Even though you aren't delivering your speech in front of a live audience, you will be practicing it so that it's the best that it can be, so that when you receive criticism, it's about a speech that has been well rehearsed. Now, be careful about confusing memory with memorization and learning something verbatim. It's not the goal of this course. At no point will you just read a speech manuscript, but you are committing it to memory in terms of the rhythm and lines that you do need to say word for word. And the more you practice it, the better you can improvise between those concrete transitions. The fifth and final canon of rhetoric is delivery. This refers to the vocal and nonverbal behavior you use when speaking. So you'll speak clearly, you'll communicate with your body, maybe you'll use gestures as you speak, and delivery is just giving the speech. Aristotle was interested in what we call rhetorical proofs. These are ways that we build persuasion, the first of which is logos. Think of logos and logic. So we're appealing to what is objectively the most correct, or what seems to be the easiest way forward, right? Ethos, think of ethos and ethics, we're appealing to credibility and character, and not correctness in the sense that it logically adds up, that's our logos, but correctness in right or wrong. And then pathos is our appeal to emotion. So you can think of pathological or path to emotion, whatever helps you remember that. The other two are a little bit easier to come up with a saying for, right? But commit those to memory. Those are important, and they'll help us later in the course, particularly when you're doing your persuasive policy speech. Finally, we're going to talk about the communication process. On the right-hand side, you see a model. That's the communication model. And then on the left, you see a list of elements. Our first is a source. The source is the place that a message is coming from. So the source will encode the message. That means they're creating the message. And then they will send it through a channel to a receiver. And that receiver will decode the message, and they will provide feedback, and the loop is never ending, right? And outside of that loop, we have something called noise, which is what can interfere with the message or distort the message. Shared meaning is created ideally, between a sender and receiver, or a source and a receiver. And it's basically just a shared understanding, right? Context is important. When you're decoding a message, you need to know who sent it, why, what they're referring to, and then that helps you to decode it accurately. And then we also want to consider goals. If you're listening to a lecture, you're listening to be informed. If you're giving a lecture, you're speaking to inform. And those are two different goals, right? Maybe the goal of a eulogy is to honor someone who has passed, or the goal of an acceptance speech is to express gratitude for an award. So you can consider all of these elements. They're very important. I would also refer back to your textbook on this one and keep this at the forefront of your mind as we move forward into the next modules. I'll see you soon. Let me know if you have any questions. Until then, be well.